Some men throw their weight around in boardrooms. Some men do it in parking lots, in restaurants, in the slow aisles of grocery stores. Clifford Ashworth did it in a Tim Hortons on a Tuesday morning in November, in front of 11 witnesses and a ceiling camera that recorded everything in high definition. And he did it to my daughter, who was 8 months pregnant and just trying to get a medium double-double before her prenatal appointment. That was his first mistake. His second was not knowing whose daughter she was. My name is Roland Kemp. I am 58 years old. I have been a Crown Attorney with the Ontario Ministry of the Attorney General for 22 years, currently serving in the Complex Prosecutions Unit in Hamilton. I take my coffee with 1 sugar, despite what my cardiologist would prefer, and I am, by every professional standard, one of the more methodical men in my office, deliberate, patient, not the sort of person who reacts before he thinks. My colleagues will tell you that. My wife will tell you that. My daughter would have told you the same thing, right up until the moment I answered her call at 9:43 on a Tuesday morning, and she told me what Clifford Ashworth had done. Let me tell you about my daughter first. Amber Kemp. She kept her name when she married 3 years ago, which I always respected, is 31 years old and a registered nurse working in the cardiac care unit at Hamilton General Hospital. She has worked double shifts back-to-back without a word of complaint. She has held the hand of a man she'd known for 4 hours while his family drove in from Sudbury. She has eaten vending machine sandwiches in stairwells because there was no other time. She is also, as of last November, 8 months pregnant with her first child, a girl. She and her husband Derek had already decided on the name Willa, after my mother, who passed in 2019 and who would have found the entire situation both infuriating and darkly satisfying. They had a nursery in their house on Cannon Street, pale yellow walls, a mobile with little silver birch leaves above the crib. A future that felt, when Amber described it to me over Sunday dinners, like something she had spent her whole careful life building toward. I did not know yet that a man I had never personally met was about to reach into that future with both hands. The Tim Hortons in question is on Upper James Street. Amber had a prenatal appointment at the clinic 2 blocks away at 10:15. She had stopped in early, as she usually did, because the clinic's waiting room is warm and smells like carpet cleaner, and she prefers to spend the extra minutes somewhere else. She was in line. She was wearing her hospital ID badge, still on from the night shift she'd ended at 7, and the kind of expression 8 months pregnant women wear in November in Hamilton, focused, moving carefully, entirely minding her own business. Clifford Ashworth walked in behind her. He was 57 years old, the founder and managing director of Ashworth Property Holdings, a commercial real estate development firm based in Mississauga that had made him, by various estimates I would later verify through professional channels, somewhere north of $300 million. He had developed 4 commercial towers in the GTA in the last decade. He sat on 2 hospital foundation boards, which will become relevant shortly. He was, by every account from people who had worked for him, a man who treated politeness as a form of weakness in others and an unnecessary constraint on himself. He was also running late, in the way that men who believe their time is worth more than anyone else's run late, loudly, visibly, as though the lateness is something the world owes him an apology for. The line moved slowly. There was one cashier. "This is Tim Hortons. These things happen." Clifford Ashworth said something to the woman ahead of him. I don't know exactly what, because Amber was 2 spots ahead and didn't hear it. What she did hear was the cashier's voice going tight in that specific way service workers' voices go when they are being spoken to in a way they can't respond to. Then the line moved. Amber reached the counter. She ordered. She stepped to the side to wait for her order, and, in doing so, shifted her bag to her other shoulder, and the corner of it caught Clifford Ashworth's elbow as he pushed past her to get to the counter ahead of the person behind her. He turned around. He looked at her. 8 months pregnant, hospital badge, November coat that no longer quite closed over her belly. And he said, loudly enough that multiple people heard it clearly, "Watch where you're putting yourself." And then, before Amber could say a word, he reached out and shoved her shoulder, open-handed, hard enough that she stumbled backward and had to grab the counter to stay upright. Then he turned back to the cashier and placed his order. Nobody moved for a moment. That specific suspended silence when something has happened that the brain hasn't quite processed yet. Amber told me later that she didn't say anything because she was doing a rapid inventory. She is a nurse. When something physical happens, her first instinct is clinical. She checked her balance. She put her hand on her stomach. She breathed. She was okay. Willa was okay. She picked up her coffee when her name was called, walked outside, sat down on a bench in the November cold, and called me. I was in my office reviewing disclosure packages for a fraud case that had been on my desk for 4 months. A case that, I would learn in the following days, was about to become the hinge point of this entire story. Her voice on the phone was the same voice she used in the cardiac unit. Level. Managed, working hard. Dad, she said, I need to tell you something, and I need you to not do anything right away. I put the disclosure package down. I'm listening, she told me. Quickly, factually, the way she'd describe a patient's vitals. By the end of it, I hadn't moved. My hand was on the desk. The disclosure package was 3 inches from my fingers. Are you okay? Is Willa okay? I'm okay. I'm going to my appointment now. They'll check everything. I needed to tell you, what's his name? A pause. She knows me. She has known me for 31 years. Dad, his name, Amber. She told me. I sat in my office for about a minute after I hung up. Then I turned to my computer, pulled up a case file I had been looking at not 40 minutes earlier, and read the name on the cover sheet. Clifford Ashworth. Ashworth Property Holdings. Fraudulent inducement, breach of fiduciary duty, and 1 count of obstruction of a municipal tender process. The case had been referred to my unit from the City of Hamilton's Integrity Commissioner's office 11 weeks ago. It involved an allegation that Ashworth had used falsified environmental assessment reports to win a $47 million contract to develop a parcel of city-owned land near the waterfront, undercutting 3 legitimate bids in the process. The evidence file was 460 pages. It was, in the professional language of my unit, a solid case. It was sitting on my desk because we had been deciding, carefully, whether to proceed to a direct indictment or take it through a preliminary inquiry first. I closed the file. I called my colleague Preethi, who is the other senior crown in the complex prosecutions unit. She is 12 years younger than me and twice as fast, and she is the person I trust most in that building. I need to talk to you about the Ashworth file, I said. Which part? All of it, I said. But first I need to tell you something that happened this morning. Preethi was quiet while I told her. She has the quality, rare in lawyers, of listening completely before she responds. When I finished, she said, Roland, you need to recuse. I know, today, formally, with full documentation. I know, and then you need to go very far in the opposite direction from anything that happens next. I know all of that, I said. I'm calling you because I want to make sure it goes to the right person. A pause. You think it's still worth proceeding? Preethi. This man committed fraud against the city of Hamilton while simultaneously sitting on the foundation board of 2 hospitals where nurses like my daughter work double shifts. And this morning he put his hands on my 8-month pregnant daughter in a Tim Hortons because she was in his way. I kept my voice even. That takes practice. The case was worth proceeding before any of that. It's still worth proceeding. I just can't be the one to do it. Another pause, shorter this time. I'll take it, she said. I filed my recusal that afternoon. It was formal, documented, and complete. I cited a direct personal conflict arising from an incident involving my family member and the subject of the proceeding. I attached a copy of Amber's statement, which she gave voluntarily, and noted the existence of security camera footage at the relevant premises. Here is what I did not do. I did not call anyone at the Tim Hortons. I did not contact a journalist. I did not post anything, say anything publicly, or do anything that was not strictly proper. Here is what I did do. I called an old friend named Gord Sweeney. Gord is not a lawyer. Gord is a retired detective from Hamilton Police Service who now does occasional consulting for a community legal clinic on Barton Street. We have known each other for 26 years. We play hockey together on Thursday nights at a rink in Dundas, with 11 other men in our 50s who are too stubborn to acknowledge what skating does to our knees. He is the kind of person who knows things and asks questions and keeps his receipts. I told him what had happened. Not in my capacity as a Crown attorney, as a father. I'm not asking you to do anything, I said. I know you're not, Gord said. I just thought you should know. Okay, he said. And then, after a moment, Roland, has anyone submitted a public records request for the footage from that Tim Hortons? I have no idea, I said. That would be a matter for the public. Right, Gord said. Right. I don't know exactly what Gord did in the following 36 hours. I know that the security footage from the Tim Hortons on Upper James appeared on a Hamilton-based community Facebook group with 87,000 members at approximately 6:15 the following morning, posted by an account that Gord has never confirmed or denied any knowledge of. I know that by 8 a.m. it had been shared 1,200 times. I know that by noon it had been picked up by CHCH News, who ran it under the headline, Hamilton developer caught on camera shoving pregnant nurse at local coffee shop. I know that by the following morning it was on CBC Hamilton, then CBC Toronto, and that the clip, Clifford Ashworth, in his good coat, shoving a visibly pregnant woman, and then ordering his coffee as though nothing had happened, had been viewed by somewhere over 2 million people. I watched none of this happen in real time because I was at Amber's prenatal appointment with her, having driven over from my office when Preethi told me to go be a father for the rest of the afternoon, which is advice I took without argument. The obstetrician confirmed that Amber was fine and Willa was fine, and that stress was not good for either of them, which Amber received with a nurse's practiced serenity. On the drive home, Amber sat in the passenger seat and scrolled through her phone. It's everywhere, she said. Don't read the comments, I said. Dad, there are 37,000 comments. Still don't read them. She put her phone down. We drove in silence for a minute. He's going to know it was you, she said. I didn't do anything. She looked at me sideways. She has her mother's eyes and her mother's ability to see directly through me when she chooses to. You followed the rules, she said. I always follow the rules. She was quiet for another moment. Then she said, Gord played hockey last Thursday, didn't he? I kept my eyes on the road. That's a question you should ask Gord, I said. The fallout from the footage was, as these things go, swift and substantial. Ashworth Property Holdings issued a statement describing the incident as an inadvertent physical contact during a stressful personal commute. The internet, characteristically, was unconvinced. Former employees emerged. A woman who had worked in his Mississauga office for 4 years gave an interview to the Toronto Star, described as a workplace in which raised voices, thrown objects, and a precise calibration of how much could be done to staff who couldn't afford to quit were standard features. 2 former contractors described being threatened with litigation when they raised concerns about project timelines. A project manager from a development in Brampton described being told explicitly that his job depended on signing off on documentation he had concerns about. The picture that assembled itself publicly was not of an isolated moment of rudeness. It was of a temperament, of a man who had spent decades doing exactly what he felt like doing, because the people around him were, in one way or another, dependent on him for something. Meanwhile, Preethi was moving. She is a thorough person under ordinary circumstances. With the case now publicly visible, and the subject of the file newly infamous for shoving a pregnant nurse on camera, the already solid evidence package was receiving the kind of attention that comes when a case becomes a referendum on something larger than itself. The city's Integrity Commissioner's office, which had been quietly cooperative, became actively cooperative. 2 of the engineering firms that had submitted the losing bids on the waterfront contract reached out through their solicitors to indicate they might have additional documentation. Preethi called me on a Friday evening, 12 days after the footage went public. I just want you to know, she said, that I'm going to direct indictment. I'm not involved, I said. You don't need to tell me. I know I don't. A pause. But you know what the charges look like. I can imagine. Fraud over 5,000, contrary to Section 380 of the Criminal Code, breach of trust in connection with the duties of an official, obstruction of a public process. Another pause. And, Roland, it looks like there are 2 more municipalities. I was quiet for a moment. Preethi. Please run this case exactly the way you'd run any other case. That's what I'm doing. I know it is. I paused. That's why I wanted you to have it. She was quiet for a moment, and I heard underneath the professionalism something that was not quite a smile but was adjacent to one. How's Amber, she said. She's 8 months pregnant and furious, I said, which is, honestly, the correct response. Good, said Preeti. Tell her the system works. I'll tell her after the verdict. Willa arrived on a Wednesday in January, 6 pounds, 11 ounces. Amber's cheekbones and Derek's ears, and a complete indifference to the proceedings of the adult world. She was the most specific and complete person I had ever met, who was less than a day old. I sat in the hospital room at Hamilton General and held her while Amber slept, and Derek went to get food from the cafeteria, and I thought, not for the first time, and not for the last, that this is the whole point. This particular small person, in this particular moment, completely unaware that somewhere in the machinery of the legal system, the man who had put his hands on her mother was waiting for a trial date. The trial of Clifford Ashworth, on 4 counts of fraud over $5,000 and 2 counts of breach of trust in connection with a public process, began in September in the Ontario Court of Justice in Hamilton. I did not attend. Preeti would not have wanted me there, and more to the point, she didn't need me there. I followed it the way a retired crown follows a public proceeding. Through reporting, through the court's public docket, and through the occasional dinner, with people who were willing to discuss things that were already matters of public record. Which is to say, I followed it carefully. What I can tell you is this. The prosecution's case, as constructed by Preeti over 9 months, was meticulous. The falsified environmental assessments, 3 of them, from a firm whose principal had since entered into a cooperation agreement with the Crown, were entered into evidence. The email trail was what email trails always are in fraud cases. A detailed record of a man who believed that written communications were private and permanent simultaneously. The engineering firms that had submitted the competing bids testified through their respective project leads about the specific numbers they had submitted, why those numbers were what they were, and what a legitimately compliant environmental assessment for that parcel would have actually shown. The cooperation agreement with the environmental firm's principal, a man named Derek Finch, no relation to Amber's Derek, who had gone to the authorities in exchange for a reduced charge and had spent the intervening period providing what Preeti later described to a journalist as very comprehensive evidence, gave the prosecution a witness who could describe the scheme from the inside. There was also the matter of the 2 additional municipalities, Burlington and Oakville. 2 more contracts, 2 more sets of falsified documents, 2 more indictments that had been consolidated after some procedural negotiation into the trial in Hamilton. What had begun as a $47 million fraud against the city of Hamilton had become a $112 million fraud against 3 municipalities. The defense did what expensive defense counsel does. They challenged the cooperation agreement. They challenged the cooperation. They questioned the chain of custody on the digital evidence. They suggested that their client had been the victim of subordinates who had acted without his knowledge, a theory that the email record made approximately as persuasive as you might imagine. The judge, the Honorable Elaine Fournier, who had been on the Ontario bench for 16 years and who was known in the Hamilton legal community for a quality I can only describe as the complete absence of patience for arguments she has already heard, allowed the defense to make every argument they wanted to make. Then she instructed the jury with the clean, direct, unadorned language of someone who has been doing this long enough to know that clarity is not the same as simplicity. The jury deliberated for 3 days. I was at Amber and Derek's house on Cannon Street when Preeti called. Amber was in the kitchen feeding Willa. Derek was making chili. It was a Saturday afternoon in October, and the birch tree in their backyard was doing what birch trees do in October in Ontario, which is to say it was spectacularly gold and entirely unconcerned with anything happening indoors. All counts, Preeti said. Guilty. Everyone. I sat with that for a moment. Thank you, I said. Preeti, this was your case. It was a good case, she said. And then, the charges related to the incident at the coffee shop, the assault, those went through a separate summary conviction process. I wanted you to know. He pled guilty last month. Conditional discharge, victim fine surcharge, mandatory conflict resolution program. She paused. It's not 26 years, but it's on the record. I had not known about the summary conviction. Preeti had handled that quietly, separately, making sure it did not contaminate the larger proceeding. Thank you, I said again. How's Willa? She has discovered her own feet, I said, and she considers them a personal achievement. Preeti laughed. Give Amber my best. I hung up. Amber was standing in the doorway of the kitchen, Willa on her hip, looking at me the way she has always looked at me when she's trying to read something in my face before I say it out loud. Guilty, I said, all counts. She nodded once, looked down at Willa, back at me. Good, she said. Just that. The sentencing took place in December. Judge Fournier sentenced Clifford Ashworth to 6 years in a federal penitentiary on the fraud and breach of trust charges, with a restitution order requiring repayment of $112 million to the 3 affected municipalities. His development firm, without its founder and with its reputation in the specific condition that 2 million views of a shoving video leaves a reputation, had already begun the process of dissolution. Institutional partners had quietly departed in the months following the footage. 2 banks had called in credit facilities. The Mississauga headquarters was on the market. His 2 seats on hospital foundation boards had been rescinded in November of the previous year, 12 hours after the footage went public. The 4 partners at the firm that had represented him face separate regulatory proceedings with the Law Society of Ontario for matters that arose during the disclosure process. That process is ongoing, and I will not comment on it, because I am a person who respects due process, even when it is being applied to people who, in my private opinion, have it coming. Gord came over for dinner, the Saturday after sentencing. He brought a bottle of Ontario Pinot Noir and played with Willa for 45 minutes, with the particular delight of a man who has spent his career standing in close proximity to the worst people are capable of and finds a 9-month-old profoundly restorative. He ate 2 bowls of the squash soup Derek made, and then we sat in the living room with our wine while Amber nursed Willa in the chair by the window. You know, Gord said, turning his glass slowly, when you told me you were filing the recusal, I thought you were stepping away. I was stepping away, I said. That's what a recusal is. You know what I mean. I handed it to the best person I had, I said. That's what the rules required. Everything that happened after that was the natural consequence of a man who had been committing fraud against public institutions for years being properly prosecuted through the appropriate legal processes. Gord looked at me for a long moment. You've been practicing that sentence, he said, since approximately 9:45 on a Tuesday morning in November, I said. He laughed. Willa, startled by the sound, looked over at him with the very serious expression she always makes when something unexpected occurs, which Amber and I agree is the best expression any of us have ever seen on any face. Outside, on Cannon Street, Hamilton was doing what Hamilton does in December, quietly, practically, without a great deal of sentimentality, getting on with it. There is a particular quality of silence in a courtroom at the moment a verdict lands. I have been in hundreds of them. The word guilty comes out of a juror's mouth, and there is a moment, half a second, maybe less, before the human weight of it settles onto the person it belongs to. Not the legal consequence. That comes later. The human one, the one where a person understands, maybe for the first time, that the world is not actually arranged around their convenience. I wasn't in the courtroom in September, when Clifford Ashworth heard guilty on each count. Preeti described it to me afterward, over coffee, as a matter of public record that anyone in the room could describe. The word she used was diminished. He looked, she said, diminished. $300 million, 30 years of commercial towers and foundation boards and rooms that rearranged themselves when he walked in. 30 years of walking away from everything he did to every person he did it to. An entire professional life built on the assumption that the rules were for other people. And then, one Tuesday morning in November, he walked into a Tim Hortons on Upper James Street, put his hands on a pregnant nurse who was minding her own business, and walked directly into the one situation in all of those 30 years that had been built, quietly, legally, and with considerable patience, to hold him accountable. Willa is 9 months old now. She pulls herself up on the edge of the coffee table, and looks around the room with an expression of pure determination, as though standing is something she invented. She sleeps in the yellow nursery under the mobile with the silver birch leaves. She does not know anything yet about Upper James Street or Tim Hortons or the fraud trial that ran through September or what her grandfather did and did not do on a Tuesday morning in November. She will, someday. And when she asks me what I did, what her grandfather, the Crown Attorney, did when a man put his hands on her mother and walked away to order his coffee, I'm going to tell her exactly the truth. I followed every rule. Every single one. And the rules, when correctly applied to someone who has spent his entire career believing he exists outside of them, are the most permanent thing in the world. If this story meant something to you, please like it and subscribe to Dad's Final Revenge for more stories about the moments when doing things right turns out to be the most powerful thing you can do.